The Life of Barry Allen, The Flash. Bartholomew Henry Barry Allen, born March 14, 1989, is a scientist in the Criminal and Forensic Science Division of the Central City Police Department. He is the son of the late Henry and Nora Allen, the foster son turned son-in-law of Joe West, the husband of Iris West-Allen, and the brother-in-law of Wally West, the archenemy of Eobard Thawne, as well as the father of his future children, Nora and Bart West-Allen. Welcome to the Amagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of Barry Allen. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. And with that out of the way, let's get into the video. Early life. Barry was born on March 14, 1989, to Henry and Nora Allen as an only child. When he was 6 years old, Barry begged his parents to take him to a science expedition in Midway City, but they unfortunately got a flat tire on the way. The family's car had to be towed to a garage in Masonville, where they were stuck all day. Barry and his parents had ice cream and french fries with gravy for dinner at a small diner and spent the night watching the local fireworks display. Barry would consider this to be one of the happiest memories he ever had with his parents. Barry and his mother would watch Fred Astaire and Frank Sinatra musicals together on rainy nights. At some point, Barry met Iris West at school, with whom he became best friends. At the age of 10, Barry formed a crush on her. Iris' father, Joe West, as well as Henry and Nora, were all aware of Barry's developing romantic feelings. On March 18, 2000, 4 days after his 11th birthday, Barry ran home from school after getting into a fight with some bullies. Though not being fast enough, his mother assured Barry that he had a good heart, and his father was proud of him for winning the fight. Later that night, Barry was comforted by his mother when he admitted he was afraid of the dark. Nora convinced him he wasn't afraid of darkness itself, just being alone in the dark, and wished him sweet dreams. Death of Nora Allen. That night, Barry was awoken by a commotion. He went downstairs and saw his mother surrounded in streaks of red and yellow lightning. Barry attempted to reach his mother, but she told him to stay back, and amidst the streaks, Barry saw the man in yellow for a brief moment, and his father urged him to run. At that very moment, however, Barry suddenly found himself 20 blocks away because his future self took him away from the Reverse Flash. Barry returned home in time to see his father being arrested by the police, and was told by his father not to enter the house. He entered, seeing Joe standing solemnly over a body. When he walked away, Barry approached the body and discovered, to his horror, that it was his mother. Following the ordeal, Barry was fostered by Joe and Iris. When Joe and Barry arrived at the West house, Barry was not crying due to shock. Joe asked Iris to show Barry the guest room, and Barry told Iris that his father did not kill his mother, to which Iris responded that she believed him. Later that night, Iris found Barry crying alone and comforted him. Living together caused an inhibitor between Barry and Iris, as growing up in the same household prevented their feelings, at least on Iris' side, from maturing beyond sibling love. Initially, Henry asked Joe not to let Barry see him. Not knowing this, Barry kept trying to run away to see his father at Iron Heights, and he was caught and stopped by Joe every time. At one point, Barry called him out for it, telling him that he wasn't his father and that he hated him. Eventually, Barry finally reached Iron Heights before Joe could stop him, and he finally came face to face with his father. Henry told him he simply did not want Barry to see him in prison. Despite this, Barry begged for his father's release, insisting that the man in the lightning was who killed his mother, not Henry. Henry told him that he couldn't help him and asked that he be a good boy and let Joe raise him. Henry was promptly taken away, and Barry became more accepting of Joe as his new guardian. 6 months after his mother's murder, Barry was still depressed and became grumpy towards everyone. Seeing this, Joe understood that Barry was acting angry because he didn't want to let the pain of the grief in, fearing his father and mother would be disappointed in him if he did. Joe assured Barry it was okay to let the pain in. Barry finally allowed himself to feel the grief and cried, with Joe comforting Barry and promising that he'd always be there for him. During the first year that Joe took him in, Barry attempted to impress the former by building a robot with wheels for his science fair project, which nearly set the school gym on fire and hurt his teacher, Mrs. Dumas. In school, Barry was relentlessly bullied by Tony Woodward. Joe noticed this and had Barry spar with Iris, who easily beat him. Joe then told Barry that if he ever got into a fight he couldn't win, it was okay to run the other way. At the age of 12, Barry went to a reptile camp, which was paid for by Joe. In 7th grade, Barry decided to mix glycerol with an oxidizing agent for his science fair project, believing he could win if he started a chemical fire. Barry got an A but was suspended. As a teenager, Barry, according to himself, lived for danger, including smoking a cigarette once, which was an unpleasant experience. In high school, Barry attempted tryouts for the football team but failed horribly and made Joe swear never to talk about it again. Barry dated Becky Cooper in high school, though she was apparently a nightmare of a girlfriend. When Barry was 16, he and Iris switched bedrooms so Iris could sneak out the window past curfew, which was 8:00 p.m. at the time. They told Joe the reason they switched bedrooms was that Barry didn't like the noise from the streets. At one point, Barry and Iris took Joe's convertible out for a joyride and ended up crashing it into an oak tree on Fairmont Drive. Without realizing he was the man who killed his mother, Barry idolized Dr. Harrison Wells so much that he read his biography twice, though he was still left not knowing much about him. Barry graduated from college with a double major in physics and chemistry. It was with this skill that Barry was motivated to study criminology at Central City University, in the hopes of proving that his father was innocent in his mother's murder. Barry was hired for the Central City Police Department by Captain David Singh. Shortly after, around 2012, he was the junior CSI on a murder case in which the victim, Judy Gimlin, was stabbed to death and her husband Reagan was the prime suspect, which touched home for Barry. His superior, Detective Ralph Dibney, apparently proved Reagan's guilt by finding the knife used to kill Judy, which contained his fingerprints. Seeing similar circumstances to his mother's murder, Barry decided to delve further into the investigation and tested the knife. The knife actually didn't match the murder weapon used to kill Judy, and Barry reported Ralph, who was subsequently fired for planting evidence. This created a rift between the two. Visit to Starling City. A year later, in December 2013, when he was 24, Barry arrived in Starling City. He wasn't able to initially get a cab as the driver pulled away, and he soon arrived at Queen Consolidated's Applied Sciences Center to investigate a mysterious break-in as a CSI from Central City with a connecting case, where he met Oliver Queen, John Diggle, Quentin Lance, and Felicity Smoke, the latter of whom he had an instant connection with. Barry was set up in the division with Felicity's help, unknown to Barry because Felicity believed they should have used him as an asset, considering his work in forensic science. The two began talking, and Barry began speculating about the Arrow and his background, making incisive observations about why the Arrow wore green instead of black, the type of arrows he used, and how he theorized that the Arrow has partners, particularly someone who had a background in computer sciences. All of this unnerved Felicity. Barry was astounded when Felicity asked him to help with a blood sample from an Arrow she received from the police by both her connections from working for Oliver, and the fact that he was working the same case as the Arrow. During that particular part of their investigation, Felicity invited Barry to a Queen Consolidated function, which was actually a party at the Queen Mansion. However, before the results came in, his cover as a crime scene investigator working for the police was blown by Oliver just after he and Felicity began arguing over a news report about the Mass Particle Accelerator. It was revealed that he was just an assistant CSI and that there was no connecting case in Central City. Barry explained what happened to him as a child and how it caused him to begin looking into cases with impossible circumstances, in hopes of one day proving one possible, therefore solving his mother's murder and freeing his father. He was later re-invited by Oliver as Felicity's +1 to come to his home, where he was throwing a party for his mother. When there, Barry apologized to Felicity while they danced. After the party, Barry was contacted by Singh and was told to return to Central City if he hoped to keep his job, and revealed the sedative used was ketamine, informing Felicity it should have been easy to track. He tried to catch the soonest train, though missed the last one of the night. He settled down into the train station to wait for the next one in the morning, when suddenly he was hit with a tranquilizer dart to the neck. When he awoke, he found himself in Oliver's base with Diggle watching him and Oliver lying on a table in full Arrow costume. Felicity approached him and asked Barry to save Oliver's life, who was not only poisoned with an unknown substance from the Argus disaster bunker, but had also been beaten by the robber who had stolen the centrifuge from Queen Consolidated, raided the blood bank, and encountered Oliver as the Arrow while stealing large amounts of ketamine from the bunker. Barry was able to save Oliver's life by thinning his coagulating blood with rat poison. Oliver was not too pleased with the situation at first, as Felicity had revealed his secret without his permission. However, Barry eventually gained Oliver's trust. He recommended that a mask would be better than the green grease paint he used on his eyes as a concealment of his identity. Oliver later asked Barry if there were any side effects to the rat poison he injected in him, and Barry admitted it could cause hallucinations and heavy sweating. After testing Oliver's blood, though, Barry discovered that Oliver's hallucinations weren't from the rat poison, and that it was psychological. Soon after, Barry headed back to Central City, but not before leaving Oliver a mask as a parting gift. The accident. On his train back to Central City, Barry encountered Martin Stein, and the two discussed physics in Harrison Wells' particle accelerator, and how it would change the world. After he got off the train, Barry soon headed back to work, arriving at a crime scene late. He was successfully able to identify the getaway car from the robbery, and also grabbed a sample of some animal feces found on the ground before heading back to his lab to examine the evidence. While processing the feces, he was greeted by Iris. Barry talked on and on about the Star Labs particle accelerator with her, noting that it provided ideas that were far beyond their current capabilities of science, hence why he was so excited. Detective West approached right as the feces had processed. Barry described the results found, explaining that it had a chemical used only at 4 different farms around town, suggesting they check them out. Following this, Barry and Iris headed to the unveiling and switching on of the particle accelerator. Barry attempted to convey his attraction toward Iris, but she simply misunderstood it. They began listening to Dr. Wells, who described how the particle accelerator would lead to a much greater future. As they were listening, a thief stole Iris' bag along with her laptop inside it. Barry ran after him, attempting to catch up to him. However, the thief knocked the wind out of him and ran off, only to later get caught by Detective Eddie Thawne. At the police station, Iris and Barry mocked Eddie, a new transfer from Keystone City. Later, Barry headed to his lab watching the news of Star Labs' particle accelerator when it suddenly became unstable. As Barry tried to close his lab's rafters due to the worsening storm, he watched in confusion and awe as the liquids around him suddenly levitated, defying gravity. The particle accelerator then exploded and sent a shockwave of dark matter through the city. Seconds later, Barry was struck by a yellow bolt of lightning through a window in the roof. He was sent flying backwards through the already charged chemicals and knocked unconscious. A red flash of light appeared across Barry's cheek, rising and then faded away. Barry was quickly rushed to Central City Hospital, where he was kept on life support while in a coma. For the following 5 weeks, Felicity visited Barry in the hospital while he was in a coma, and left only to help Oliver. Barry constantly seemed to flatline. However, it was concluded by Harrison Wells, who had started visiting him, that Barry's heart was in fact beating too fast to even register on the EKG. When Barry's condition began to worsen, he was moved to Star Labs to be closely monitored and was frequently visited by Iris West. When Iris came by one day, she received a static shock when she touched Barry's hand. Early days and setbacks. When he woke up from his coma 9 months later, Barry met Dr. Wells, Cisco Raymond, and Dr. Caitlin Snow. He learned of his coma and how it had been caused by the particle accelerator explosion. Much to their annoyance, Barry chose to leave, claiming that he felt normal. Barry went to meet Iris at her work, where the two embraced. Iris was incredibly thrilled to see Barry awake and walking. As they talked, Barry noticed time slow down and then speed up again. Iris grabbed her jacket, and then they went to visit Joe at the police department. Joe was more than happy to see Barry, though he was called to a robbery at Gold City Bank. Detective Thawne followed West, while also expressing his happiness at Barry's return. As they left, Barry noticed a rough detainee who quickly reached for a police officer's gun. Before he could grab it, Barry sped over to him and back, stopping him from doing anything. Freaked out by the incident, Barry promised to call Iris that night and left. Once outside, Barry noticed his hand vibrating at an unbelievable speed, shortly followed by him accidentally almost running into a bin at super speed, then breaking the back window of a cop car. Realizing the gifts he had, Barry went off running, testing out his super speed. Before long, he accidentally ran through the back of a van. Sometime later at an airfield, Barry met with Cisco, Caitlin, and Wells. He put on a tight suit and got ready to run. Dr. Wells cautioned restraint, whereupon Barry began to run at full pelt. Partway through his test run, he began to remember the night of his mother's murder, specifically a ball of lightning with a man seemingly inside it surrounding his mother, and he crashed, fracturing his wrist. Back at Star Labs, they discovered that Barry's wrist had healed in under 3 hours, much to their amazement. Dr. Wells inquired as to what happened, and Barry explained what he'd remembered. A man somehow inside a ball of lightning. Barry raised the question that perhaps there were more people like him, but Harrison rejected the idea, claiming that Barry was unequivocally one of a kind. Following that, Barry went to meet Iris at Jitters. He looked upon Iris and Eddie kissing. Barry and Iris soon took a walk as Iris explained to Barry how her and Eddie had met, asking Barry to promise not to tell her father. As they talked, a police car involved in a car chase slammed on the brakes, leading to Barry pulling Iris out of the way as the car hit the wall under the bridge. As the other car raced by, Barry recognized its driver, a man thought to be dead, Clyde Marden. Barry ran after the car, crashing through the side and entering. Before Marden could get his gun out, Barry grabbed the steering wheel, making the car tumble on its side and onto its roof. Marden exited the vehicle relatively unscathed, and Barry quickly followed. He called out to catch Marden's attention, but soon the area was flooded with fog, apparently made by Marden himself, causing a car to run into the already overturned car, forcing Barry to speed to a nearby patch of grass for safety. Paramedics soon arrived along with the police, including Joe. Joe scolded Barry for having Iris out in the open, and Iris for having followed the danger. Barry took Joe aside, telling him of his belief that the car was driven by Clyde Marden, who had apparently survived a plane explosion, also somehow gaining the ability to control the weather. Despite various pieces of apparent evidence, Joe didn't believe him. Frustrated with Barry's apparent fantasies, Joe explained how his claims were impossible, including the ball of lightning with the man inside. He knew Barry's father was the murderer, as did numerous others. Having never asked for anything from Barry, Joe asked Barry for once to be realistic, to which Barry simply walked off, disappointed. He returned to Star Labs, angry at Wells for lying to him about being the only one affected by the particle accelerator's explosion. Dr. Wells claimed to not be entirely sure, as there had been numerous amounts of radiation, including antimatter, dark energy, and X elements, all apparently theoretical prior to the event. Despite them only being theory up to that point, Wells claimed that Barry was proof otherwise. He went into more detail, explaining that they'd been looking for more metahumans, a term they'd coined for people like Barry. Barry brought up Clyde Marden, whom they had to stop before he hurt anyone again. Wells cautioned Barry to keep himself safe, as Barry had the potential to unlock previously undiscovered vaccines, medicines, and breakthroughs in science. Yet he wished to put himself on the line and play hero. Dr. Wells saw him as nothing special, just a boy who'd been struck by lightning. Upset by Harrison's words and lack of confidence, Barry called Oliver Queen, hoping to get some advice. He visited Oliver in Starling City, where he expressed that he believed Barry could save people, though in an entirely different way to the Arrow. As opposed to the Arrow's tough vigilantism, Barry could be a guardian angel to the people of his city, saving them in a flash. As he speeds away, Oliver expressed his awe at Barry's powers. Barry headed back to Central City to Star Labs. He apologized to Caitlin and Cisco, understanding that they'd lost things in the explosion, but there had been an increase in crime presumably occurring because of the creation of metahumans. They agreed to help, and Cisco even suggested the use of a suit he'd made, initially for a firefighter, but believed it suited Barry well. He put on the suit and raced to Marden's farm, where they'd noticed an acute change in the weather. He saved Joe and Eddie, who'd come to investigate after a piece of debris flew at them. With Marden's tornado heading towards the city, with an increasing wind speed, Barry suggested that he run around the tornado in reverse to unravel it. Despite Caitlin and Cisco's belief that Barry might not hold up, he proceeded to run around it. Before he could run fast enough, Marden knocked him away. Believing him to be too strong, Barry didn't think he could beat Clyde. However, as he was about to give up, Dr. Wells began communicating with him. Despite acting selfishly, Wells expressed that he truly, deeply believed that Barry was special, that he could help stop the havoc he'd created. With the confidence boost, Barry was able to run fast enough, clocking just over 700 miles per hour, ultimately unraveling the tornado. After being knocked to the ground, both Clyde and Barry stood up. Clyde proceeded to point a gun at him, claiming them to be the same, though Barry strongly disagreed. Before he could shoot Barry, Joe intervened. The following morning, still at the crime scene, Joe and Barry discussed Barry's powers, and Joe apologized for not believing him and also for believing his father was a murderer. Barry also promised not to reveal anything to Iris so as to keep her safe. Not long after, Barry visited his father in Iron Heights prison, assuring him that he still believed in him and that he was incredibly proud to be his son. After that, with a lightning bolt symbol added to his suit, Barry ran through the streets of Central City, saving a man from crashing on his bicycle. Barry continued to save citizens throughout Central City, much to the frustration of Caitlin and Joe. At his day job with the CCPD, Barry investigated a strange robbery and murder scene wherein the surveillance footage showed one man, but evidence indicated that there was at least 6 present. He later made a casual remark that the perp's footprints were about the same size as those of Captain Singh's, but was reprimanded for it by Joe, who reminded him not to tell Iris about his ability. Later, Barry went to Stagg Industries with Iris, where Simon Stagg was set to receive an award from Central City University. Iris was covering the event for her journalism assignment and needed Barry to help her with the scientific parts. At the event, the armed gunmen responsible for the scene Barry had just been investigating arrived and were in the process of stealing valuables when a security guard attempted to stop them. Just before they could shoot him, Barry saved him and went after the robbers, only to lose consciousness along the way. After his fainting, this prompted the Star Labs scientists to investigate Barry's recent weaknesses. After a run at a Cisco'd treadmill, it was discovered that Barry had acute hypoglycemia, a condition that Barry developed because of his sped-up metabolism, and could be remedied by a more extensive meal plan. Joe then arrived at the lab and called him out for his unnecessary heroics. Because of this, Barry lost confidence in himself and, face-to-face with Danton Black, the metahuman that infiltrated the Stagg event, he realized that he did not have the ability to really go up against them. At this point, Iris was still trying to get Barry to tell her what was going on with him. Just when he had momentarily quit his association with Wells and the others, Iris revealed that her new journalism topic would be his alter ego, who has been dubbed the Red Streak by citizens. Caitlin then called Barry back to Star Labs and told him of a way to defeat Black. Joe then arrived to convince Barry to go after him. Barry did and followed Danton to Stagg Industries, where he intended to kill Stagg once and for all. With a pep talk from those at the lab, including Joe, Barry was able to isolate the real Danton from the hundreds of clones and put him down. When Danton momentarily regained consciousness, he attacked Barry only to miss and hit the window. Barry tried to save him from falling, but Danton, not wanting to be saved, summoned up an extra hand to pull himself from Barry's grip and fell, much to Barry's disappointment. Later, Barry commended the group at the lab, who then fully supported Barry's city saving, even Caitlin, and made amends with Joe. Barry went to the movies with Iris when Cisco and Caitlin informed him of a car chase. Using his speed, Barry quickly stopped the robber and returned before Iris even knew he was gone. The next day, Barry and Joe investigated the death of the Darbinian crime family. Noting that the victims were poisoned with gas, they would have all died at the same time, yet some of them had time to move. This led to Barry realizing that they were dealing with another metahuman who could control gas. At Star Labs, Joe brought up the topic of finding a suitable prison for metahumans. Wells and Cisco decided that the particle accelerator would be the best place to hold them until they could cure them of their powers. Caitlin, remembering the death of her fiancée Ronnie, froze in her spot. Seeing her distress, Barry offered for Caitlin to help him run tests on the poison gas they'd procured. At Barry's lab, the two talked about Ronnie until the DNA results came back, revealing that the gas inside the victims also had someone else's DNA. Hearing of the murder of Teresa Howard on the police radio, Barry left despite Caitlin's pleas. Arriving at the scene, Barry found himself too late and angrily chased after the metahuman. Before he could fight him, the man transformed into gas and forced Barry to inhale him. Rushing back to Star Labs, the team was able to painfully extract the gas with a needle. Despite being told to rest, Barry went to talk to Joe and confide in him about his inability to save the judge. He went on to mention his temptation to break his father out of jail, though Joe reasoned that his father would simply be a fugitive, and despite his abilities, Barry would never be able to save everyone. Later, Barry apologized to Caitlin for worrying her, only for Caitlin to reveal that what he had said to her were the same last words Ronnie said before he died. Barry decided to help her overcome her fear of walking into the particle accelerator. After finding peace, she thanked Barry and the two embraced. Wells and Cisco soon called them up and revealed that a sedative was also found in the gas. Barry told Cisco to check if anyone was executed on the night of the particle accelerator explosion, as the two chemicals were used when executing death row inmates. They identified the metahuman to be Kyle Nimbus, a hitman for the Darbinian crime family. The family had turned on Nimbus, leading him to be arrested by Joe West and prosecuted by Judge Teresa Howard. Barry quickly suited up and headed to Iron Heights Prison, saving Joe, who was visiting Barry's father. Barry then went after the Mist, as Cisco proudly nicknamed him, defeating him by tiring him out. His fatigue would have forced him to revert to his human form eventually. Barry later visited his father and confided in him that he missed his mother. Henry comforted him by telling him the story of how he learned to walk. Barry realized that to honor his mother, he had to continue running as he has always done. Barry trained the speed of his mind by multitasking by playing a game of chess with Harrison Wells, a game of Operation with Caitlin, and a game of table tennis with Cisco. Barry defeated Cisco and Caitlin but made a mistake which caused him to lose against Wells. Soon after, they had an alert of a bank robbery, to which Barry responded too quickly. At the scene, Barry managed to unmask Leonard Snart, the leader of his crew. After a guard was shot, Barry quickly rushed him to St. Andrew's Hospital and quickly returned to the scene for work. When Captain Singh noted that a guard said there were 3 robbers, Barry corrected him to 4, though he quickly justified his reasoning as it had to have been a 4-man job. After Singh sarcastically thanked Barry for his insight, Joe asked if Barry saw anything that could help the case, to which Barry told Joe he saw one of them unmasked. At the precinct, Barry quickly identified Snart and learned that Snart's father was a dirty cop. Later, when Iris brought Barry coffee, Barry was told by Iris that she began a blog about the streak. Barry attempted to convince her to stop with the blog, as it only brings crazies and trolls, but failed. Barry was shocked when he saw Felicity in his lab at the police station. He caught up with Felicity and learned Felicity listened to his entire conversation with Oliver on the rooftop. Barry showed Felicity his powers and brought her to Star Labs. When asked if they could trust Felicity, Barry told Cisco and Caitlin that she works with the Arrow, reassuring them. Barry showed his powers again, using the treadmill where Barry attempted to show off by running backwards, though he failed. When Barry brought Felicity to Jitters, he was invited by Iris to join her and Eddie at Trivia Night and to bring Felicity. Barry stated that they were only friends. At Trivia Night, Barry and Felicity answered a majority of questions correctly. Iris then pushed Barry to ask Felicity out again, assuming Felicity was very interested in Barry based on how she dressed. After Snart was spotted, Barry left and had Felicity cover for him, though she had no excuse that could work for him. Barry arrived in time to save Joe and a few others, but due to the fact that he was struck by the cold gun when saving Joe, he was slowed down and failed to save a security guard. Barry later was furious at Cisco for building the weapon which caused the death of a man. Barry felt betrayed as he was never notified of such a weapon, and this meant he was unprepared. Barry quickly learned that Cisco originally made the gun to be used on him had he become uncontrollable. After the team tracked Snart, Barry decided to take him on his own and turn off all communications. When Barry confronted Snart, Snart noted that Barry's weakness was his altruism. He needed to always save others rather than going after the villain. Snart froze the wheels of the train, causing it to derail as he fled. Barry, having no choice, managed to rescue all the passengers, though he was attacked by Snart. Before Snart could finish him, Barry was saved by Cisco, Caitlin, and Felicity. Back at Star Labs, Barry said his goodbyes to Felicity, though he later chased after her and hopped on her train. The two had a conversation about relationships before sharing a kiss. Barry was hanging out with Cisco, Caitlin, Iris, and Eddie at a bar, where he discovered that because of his high metabolism, he could not get drunk. Suddenly, an explosion was reported at a building. Barry raced over to see a window washer about to fall. Thinking of no other way to save him, Barry asked Cisco and Caitlin how fast he would need to go to run up a building. They told him that if he moved at extremely fast speeds, he would be fine, but must maintain his speed on the way down or risk serious injury. Barry rescued the man but was seen by Iris. Blurring his face so she wouldn't recognize him, he quickly left. Later, as police investigated, Barry informed Joe that he could find no bomb casing. Searching through the files using his powers, Barry found some information that pertained to the incident. Back at the police station, Barry was told by Joe to give the military everything they had on the case. Barry handed the files over, using his speed, managed to snatch one file from them. Joe told him to consult with the crew at Star Labs. At the lab, Barry told them of what happened. Wells was familiar with Wade Ealing, the general leading the investigation. Wells explained that he worked with Wade to develop gene therapies for soldiers, while Wells was more concerned over its benefit to civilians, only for him to sever their partnership when he found out Ealing's plans to develop mind-reading abilities for interrogation purposes. Cisco went through the Army's digital records where they discovered the culprit was a woman named Bet Sansuchi, a bomb specialist for the Army. Barry found Bet at her last known address. However, when he tried to take her in, contact with her caused his clothes to begin to detonate. Bet told Barry to get out of his clothes before they exploded, which he did, just barely escaping the blast. Back at Star Labs, Barry told a distraught Cisco about the suit and revealed to the others that she was a metahuman. Joe came to him and asked Barry why he didn't tell him Iris saw him the other night. Barry told him she caught him off guard, so Joe told him to tell Iris to stop blogging about him. Barry begged Iris to stop, but she refused, claiming that he himself had wanted to know about the impossible since they were young. Barry noted that she wasn't even putting her name on it. Iris told Barry only to talk to her when he was ready to tell her the truth about why he was so skeptical. Cisco and Caitlin called and told him that Bet was spotted at the location of the surgeon who experimented on her. Barry arrived just in time to save Bet from being captured. Back at Star Labs, the others told Bet of the particle accelerator explosion and how it changed her. As they examined her, Caitlin discovered a tracker inside her graze wound when the army attacked her, leading Wade right to Star Labs. The others quickly got her out while Wells stalled Wade. Outside, testing her abilities, Bet asked Barry if the others had tried to help him find a cure. Barry had told her how a friend once told him that the bolt struck him for a reason, and now because of it, he can help people. Joe called and told Barry that Iris put her name on her blog. Barry confronted her as the Flash and told her to stop writing about him. Iris revealed to him that she was writing to help Barry prove that the impossible does exist. Barry arrived at Star Labs where the others revealed to him and Bet that curing her was at the moment impossible. Barry suggested that she join their team, but the others pointed out that Bet's powers were too destructive and could put them all in danger, despite Barry pointing out that she was the first metahuman they encountered who was not a criminal or a person who deliberately used their powers to hurt others. Back at his lab at the police station, Barry met up with Joe. He told him that by visiting Iris as the Flash, he found out that Iris was only writing about him to help. Barry pointed out that the only way to get Iris to stop was to tell her the truth, claiming he told her everything only for Joe to reveal he knew Barry had feelings for Iris since he was a child, and noted that Barry has not told Iris his feelings about her. Barry claimed it didn't matter since she was already dating Eddie, but Joe told him that when fate wants something to happen, whether it be him getting hit by the bolt that gave him his powers, or getting two people to fall in love, it works things out. Back at Star Labs, the others told Barry that Bet had left without saying where she was going. When they finally found her about to engage Ealing and his men, Barry rushed to her location before she could kill him. As Barry talked her out of killing Ealing, the general shot her, killing her. As her body began to detonate, the others told Barry to get her remains out of the city. Barry asked them how fast he would have to go to run on water. Team guessed about 650 miles per hour, but told him he must escape the blast once he dropped her. Barry did and just barely managed to outrun the shockwave. Later, as Ealing covered up the incident, Barry expressed disappointment as Ealing had killed Bet in cold blood right in front of him, and yet they could do nothing to him. Caitlin tried to comfort him, telling him that running on water put him in interesting company. Back at Joe's house, Barry told Iris about his situation with Bet, without telling her the specific details, and asked her one more time to stop writing about the streak. Iris once again refused, forcing Barry to tell her that they should not talk to each other for a while. Later, Barry visited Iris once again as the streak and tried to convince her to stop writing about him. However, she ignored his request and instead tried to find out more about him. She then asked what she should call him, with Barry claiming anything would be better than the streak. Their conversation was cut short when they heard sirens. Rushing to the crime, Barry saved a kid who was about to be run over by the culprit. Cutting the criminal off, Barry discovered he was a metahuman when the man ripped the door off the Humvee he had stolen and threw it at him. Barry dodged this and attacked the man, only for his skin to turn into a steel-like substance, resulting in Barry injuring his hand and the man brutally backhanding him. Beaten, Barry escaped, but not before the criminal told him that he was born to take a beating, a phrase that seemed familiar to him. Rushing back to Star Labs, Barry passed out on the floor. Caitlin examined his injuries and told him he had various fractures, concussion, and a bruised spleen. The injuries being so severe that Caitlin told him even with his healing abilities, it would take a couple of hours for him to recover. Barry then told them about the metahuman's abilities and asked how he was supposed to fight a man made of steel. Dr. Wells and the team assured him that they would find a way. The next day, Barry reported to the Central City Police Department, where he confirmed with Joe that the metal man was indeed a metahuman. Joe told Barry that he was putting him and Eddie on the case so that Barry could explain to Eddie what he saw. Barry then went to see the Central City District Attorney, who identified the Man of Steel as Tony Woodward. Barry recognized the name. Woodward was a former classmate of Barry and Iris's, who bullied Barry throughout his childhood. After the meeting, Barry and Eddie ran into Iris. Eddie asks Barry what's going on between Iris and him, not knowing that Barry was avoiding Iris, but Barry told him everything was fine. At Star Labs, Barry was introduced to a girder dummy built by Cisco so Barry could learn the right speed to take down Tony Woodward. Barry was easily defeated and dislocated his shoulder in the process. Shortly after, he was called by Eddie, who had found the missing Humvee. Barry responded, and as he arrived, Eddie recommended that he should get a car. Eddie then asked what was happening between him and Iris again, where Barry revealed they had a fight. Barry and Eddie then headed to Rusty Iron Ale Brewing Company after suspecting he had dropped by there due to the kegs in the trunk. After questioning a few men at the brewery, one man ran. Barry and Eddie chased after him. Barry ran in front of the two, where the man punched Barry, though it slowed him down enough for Eddie to take the man down. They then learned that Tony supposedly died in an accident, though they revealed to the man that he lived. Barry visited Iris at Jitters again, where he told her that Tony is an example of why she should stop blogging about him. As the cops arrived, Barry ran off to Tony's hideout. Barry was easily defeated by Tony and rendered unconscious. After he was brought back to Star Labs, he was yelled at by Harrison Wells, who reminded him that they were still finding a way to stop him. Barry was then told that he had found a way to stop Tony, and that is to hit him at 837 miles per hour. At the precinct, Barry and Eddie discuss being victims of bullying as kids, while blowing off steam using a punching bag. They were soon told that Iris was missing, and the two quickly rushed to help. After learning that a fire alarm went off at his old elementary school, Barry quickly realized that that was where Tony and Iris were. Barry fought Tony but was once again defeated. Barry then ran away from the school, 5.3 miles exactly, then ran back towards the school, breaking the sound barrier and knocking Tony down. Barry then greeted and incarcerated Tony, revealing his identity, and told him that the particle accelerator made them who they truly were. After walking away from the makeshift prison, Barry celebrated as he finally had his revenge on Tony. Barry then greeted Iris at Jitters and the two reconciled. When Iris told Barry more about the streak, she told him how he comes and goes in the blink of an eye, and Barry interrupted her, saying he does it in a flash. Barry went for an early morning coffee run at Jitters, though a trainee was working that morning. After a woman complained about it, Barry sped fast and got everyone their coffee and left a large tip for the trainee. As he left Jitters, a man grabbed him and asked for his wallet. Barry laughed at the man as he chose him out of everyone else in the city. Barry proceeded to take a majority of the man's clothes off and brought a police officer to him as he ran away. Barry later was called to a crime scene where a man had been burned to death. Joe said Barry had to ID him, though Eddie asked how Barry was going to do so with the man's face melted off. Barry then bragged about his mad skills. Barry then brought the photo of the man to Star Labs, where they managed to ID the man as Casey Donahue. Shortly after, the man's ID was used at an electrical plant, which Barry quickly responded to. When Barry arrived, he encountered Farouk Gibran, a metahuman who has the ability to drain electricity. Barry made a few attempts to avoid his attacks, though he was soon struck by Farouk. Barry later tried to run away, though to his surprise, he had lost his super speed. At Star Labs, they had tested him on the treadmill, though to everyone's surprise, Barry ran slowly, even for a normal person. Barry was warned about the metahuman who had siphoned his abilities and killed the man. Barry later bumped into William Tachman at the precinct, who had complimented him for his watch. At Star Labs, they managed to identify the metahuman who shortly arrived at the lab, demanding to see Harrison Wells. Wells shortly told Barry that they could try jump-starting him to regain his speed, which Barry quickly agreed to. When Farouk broke into the lab, Barry tried to talk sense into him, but Farouk only struck Barry. Cisco managed to close the doors to hold Farouk off for a short while. Barry and Caitlin then went to the treadmill to jump-start his powers. When Cisco turned the power back on, Caitlin was hesitant to follow through as she was afraid he would die. Barry told Caitlin that if she doesn't follow through, they would all die. When Caitlin made an attempt to jumpstart Barry, they learned that it had failed. Barry and Caitlin then witnessed Tony get defeated by Farouk. Barry asked what he was doing outside of the prison, where Tony reminded him he never steps away from a fight. Tony then told Barry and Caitlin to get out as Tony died. Barry was then furious at Wells, who had used Tony to buy some time. They then noticed that Barry's cells were still regenerating despite the fact that Barry didn't have his speed. Cisco and Caitlin then believed the reason he had yet to regain his speed was because it was mental and he didn't believe enough. When they made an attempt to escape the lab, they were attacked by Farouk. Wells then finally faced Farouk. When Farouk attacked Wells, Barry finally believed enough to regain his speed and save Wells. Barry faced Farouk once more, but this time he had connected to his powers and the energy overwhelmed Farouk, killing him. Barry then rushed to the precinct, worrying that something had happened to Iris. He was relieved when he saw her safe in Joe's arms. After they locked up Farouk's body, Caitlin noticed that Barry's cells were regenerating faster than before. Barry paid Eddie a visit at the hospital. After Iris left to grab a coffee, Barry briefly left and had a conversation with Iris as the Flash. Barry then told Iris he would never be late again and that Iris is worth being on time for. Barry then ran off and returned to Eddie's hospital room. Barry arrived at a bank that Roy Bivolo was robbing, only to find everyone attacking each other. Barry managed to save a man from being shot just as everyone began to recover. When Joe and a few other police arrived at the scene, Barry suggested to Joe that the people were whammied. At the precinct, Barry learned that Eddie finally believed the Flash's existence, though he learned Eddie believes he's a menace. Barry proceeded to steal Captain Singh's lunch as he went to Star Labs to discuss the new metahuman. Shortly after, Iris called him out through her blog. Before Barry left, Caitlin told him not to get involved in Iris and Eddie's relationship, as he would be responsible for their breakup. When Barry arrived at Jitters, he told Iris his name was Ralph. Barry was warned by Iris that Eddie was pushing to get him behind bars. Barry managed to get to the storage facility Roy was hiding at before Joe and 2 other police officers could be killed. Barry was then greeted by Oliver, who had arrived in time to injure a whammied police officer. Barry then raced to the barn Oliver, Felicity, and Diggle were hiding at. When he arrived, he bragged at how he gave Oliver a half-hour head start, yet still beat him. Barry asked the 3 what they were doing in Central City, where he learned they were investigating a homicide which possibly connected to Central City, due to the material of the boomerang used to kill. Barry suggested that the 2 teams should work together, though Oliver refused as he didn't want any more people in on his secret. Barry then carried Felicity and took her to Star Labs as she volunteered to go help. Barry was later told by Harrison and Joe not to trust Oliver as they feared he was too dangerous. The following day, Barry met up with Oliver and Felicity at CC Jitters, where Barry learned that Oliver had helped get the name of the metahuman. Barry was then asked by Iris how he knew Oliver Queen. She then sarcastically said that Oliver's arms were twice the size of his and told him that Oliver was on her top 3 cheat list. Barry was then glad when Oliver decided to work along with him. The following day, Barry arrived late for the training despite his speed. Barry was told by Oliver that he always ran in blind and has a lot to learn. Barry was told to run a distance and run back, and then he'd get shot by an arrow. But Barry told Oliver he wasn't going to be shot. Barry proved him wrong by catching the arrow, though he was struck in the back by 2 bolts which Oliver had set up. At the precinct, Barry was told once again not to trust the arrow, though Barry defended him, saying he's the reason they had Bavolo's name. Barry then decided to cut off the partnership and go after Roy himself. Barry was whammied by Roy, but he believed that there was no effect on him. Barry proceeded to bring up Ronnie in front of Caitlin. He later met up with Oliver, where he told him he believed Oliver was jealous of him. At the precinct, Barry lashed out at Captain Singh. Later on, Barry attacked Eddie and threw him out of Iris's car. As he was about to beat Eddie, Barry was hit by a trick arrow from Oliver. Barry then pulled the rope from the arrow and dragged Oliver down an alley. When Oliver fired 2 arrows, Barry dodged them, believing Oliver had missed, though he failed to realize that there was an electricity box behind him. Oliver then injected Barry with 2,000 milligrams of horse tranquilizer, though his metabolism burned it all off. Barry then ran circles around Oliver, and as Oliver used one of his arrows to get on the roof, Barry reached the roof first and knocked Oliver down. Barry then dodged a few hits from Oliver before punching him several times. Barry then caught 2 arrows which Oliver had set up to his motorbike. Barry was then shot in the leg with a flechette, and then held by Oliver as Joe and Harrison arrived to reverse the effects from Bavolo. The following day at Jitters, Barry apologized to Oliver for his actions and words, but was told by Oliver that guys like them can never get the girl because of what they do. Barry visited Iris at Jitters, though he learned Captain Singh has called the task force to bring him in. Iris proceeded to tell him she doesn't want to see him again after what he did to Eddie. Barry then ran off into the night. Barry arrived in time to intercept 2 boomerangs before they struck Oliver. Barry ran to the Arrow Cave and performed the salmon ladder at super speed in front of Caitlin and Felicity. Barry then stated the salmon ladder made him hungry for sushi, which he quickly grabbed before rushing back. When Barry returned to the Arrow Cave, he had blown his identity to Lila Michaels, who he thought was Diggle's wife. Barry offered to help with the case, though Oliver told him that things are a lot different. Barry told Oliver that he had begun to approach cases more carefully than just running into them. Oliver then accepted his help and told Barry they needed to reassemble the boomerangs, which Barry did swiftly. Barry and Oliver visited Quentin Lance, where Quentin had forgotten his name and believed it to be Bart. Quentin also believed that Barry was hit by a bus rather than lightning, though Barry corrected him. Barry asked Quentin about Klaus Marcos, where he learned enough information to track Klaus down. Barry was later surprised that Oliver was part of the Bratva, where Oliver told him that he's no longer a member. At the Bratva's hideout, Barry managed to subdue the members before Oliver arrived. After Oliver tortured Klaus, Barry brought Klaus to the Starling City Police Department and cuffed him to a drawer. When Barry returned, he admitted that he should have listened to Harrison Wells and Joe West. When Oliver told him that Starling City isn't always sunny and that he had friends and family murdered, Barry interrupted Oliver, saying he watched his mother get murdered also. Barry then told Oliver that he shouldn't use his own personal tragedies to torture whoever pissed him off. Oliver then made it clear to him that if his way of dealing with criminals was too hard, then Barry was not allowed to stay and help. When they believed they had tracked Digger Harkness, Barry and Oliver arrived at the warehouse, though they realized that they were played. When they returned, they found Lila in critical condition. Barry rushed her to Starling General Hospital. After Oliver blamed himself, Barry reassured him it wasn't his fault. When Oliver told Barry that everything he had been through had taken away his humanity, Barry told him that his humanity is what got him through everything. Barry and Oliver arrived later at the train station where they had tracked Digger. Digger told them that they could stop him or stop 5 bombs from detonating. Barry left to defuse the bombs while Oliver dealt with Digger. While Barry arrived at the first bomb, the team quickly realized that the bombs are linked, and if one is defused, the remaining will detonate. Cisco told Barry that he needed to cut all 5 wires at the same time, though Barry reminded him he wasn't multiplex. Barry then quickly transported Felicity, Caitlin, Roy, and Cisco to the other 4 bombs, where the 5 of them managed to cut the wires simultaneously and stop the bombs from detonating. At the Arrow Cave, Barry was surprised when he had a mannequin set up for a future team-up. When Oliver said he would still be calling the shots, Barry told him we'll see about that. Barry and Oliver then went to a warehouse to settle once and for all who would win in a fight. Before they dueled, Barry told Oliver that he could still inspire people, but as Oliver Queen. Barry managed to catch 2 arrows from Oliver before charging toward him and dodging multiple arrows. Barry visited the West household for Christmas. When he set up the Christmas tree using his speed, he was told to remove what he had added, as the only red-suited man Joe wanted to see in the house was Kris Kringle. Iris shortly arrived with eggnog using her grandmother's famous recipe. Barry and Iris exchanged gifts. He gave Iris a replica of her mother's wedding band. Iris gave Barry a microscope, which she thought was lame, but Barry claimed he loved it. They were interrupted by Eddie, who joined them for tree trimming. Barry went to Star Labs, where he brought the team gifts, as well as Grandma Esther's eggnog. After an attack at Mercury Labs, they discovered it was the work of the man in yellow. Barry quickly wanted to go after him, but was told by Joe that the speedster took all of the evidence and threatened to kill Iris. At the precinct, Barry had memories of the night he looked upon his bulletin board. He was visited by Iris, who had been calling his name multiple times. Iris told Barry that Eddie had asked her to move in, and she said yes. She then asked if Barry had feelings for her, as Eddie was under the impression that he liked her. Barry quickly denied this suggestion. As Iris left, Barry sulked to himself, but moments later saw the man in yellow, the Reverse Flash, watching him from just across the precinct. Barry chased after the Reverse Flash and begged to know why he killed his mother, but the Reverse Flash told him if he wanted to know, he'd have to catch him. The two raced toward a stadium where they battled, though Reverse Flash quickly defeated Barry. Barry asked the Reverse Flash who he really was, but the man claimed Barry already knew who he was, and that they had been fighting each other for years. As Barry tried to fight back, the Reverse Flash subdued him and told Barry it was his destiny to die at his hands, just like it was his mother's. The following day, Barry told the team about what had happened. After Barry believed he couldn't catch him, Wells reminded him that force fields are impervious to speed. Barry and Joe are visited by Tina McGee at the precinct, who brought an unsigned warrant. Barry blackmailed Tina into giving them the tachyon prototype within the hour. Barry was then told by Joe and Wells that it was best for him to stay away while they capture the man in yellow. Barry argued that it was his fight, though they still shut him down. Barry visited his father and told him that he had found the man who murdered Nora. When he apologized for failing to catch the man, his father reassured him that it wasn't his fault. Barry was then told to stop pursuing that man, as everything that had happened to Barry was influenced by the murder. His father noted that he had given up the chance to be with Iris because he was too consumed with what had happened. His father then told Barry not to let the man take any more from him. Barry went on to visit Iris and confess his feelings, leaving Iris in tears. Barry received a text from Caitlin that Reverse Flash was attacking Star Labs. When Flash arrived, he attacked the Reverse Flash, though he was quickly defeated again. Before the Reverse Flash could kill him, however, Flash was saved by a seemingly alive Ronnie, who quickly fled shortly after. Back at the precinct, Barry and Joe recount the early days of Barry moving in. Joe claimed that Barry changed the atmosphere of the house and asked Barry to move back in. They then returned to Joe's home for a Christmas gathering where he gave his best wishes to Eddie and Iris. Upset that he couldn't stop the Reverse Flash in their last encounter, Barry trained harder. He had Cisco use a drone to fire ammunition at him, all of which he evaded. He then had Cisco fire a missile, which Barry successfully grabbed and threw toward the drone. Shortly after Snart re-emerged, Barry quickly realized Snart was setting a trap for the Flash. Barry vowed to take Snart down, but Wells told Barry to set his priorities straight and focus on taking the Reverse Flash down. Barry went to Joe and told him he was going to focus on the Reverse Flash, and left Snart to Wells and Cisco, much to Joe's dismay. At Star Labs, after Caitlin brought up how Ronnie had brought her scuba diving, Barry realized that Firestorm wasn't a name, but an acronym. After Leonard Snart and Mick Rory steal the fire and ice painting from the Rathaways, many of the CCPD were injured, and Barry admitted to Joe he should have listened and focused on the current situation. Wells apologized to Barry for pushing him to focus on the Reverse Flash, but Barry told Wells he had made the decision on his own. After Snart and Rory made their public address to the Flash, Barry went after them, making himself public for the first time. Though Snart and Rory got the upper hand at first, Barry realized in order to cancel the two's weapons out, he had to move slower. When Leonard told Barry that he won this time, Barry responded that there wouldn't be a next time. The following day, after Iris moved out, Barry moved back in with Joe. With the assistance of his team, Barry took down the Royal Flush Gang with ease. When he returned to Star Labs, the team took a group photo. After Wells was attacked by Hartley Rathaway, Barry went over to his mansion. When he noticed the shatter of the glass, he realized it couldn't have been a teenage prank. At his lab at CCPD, Barry demonstrated how Hartley likely used some sonic technology when he attacked Wells. After Eddie reported an attack on Rathaway Industries, Caitlin called Barry, but Barry told Caitlin he already knew why she was calling. Original timeline, Barry quickly took down Rathaway, who told Barry he could hear Cisco, Caitlin, and Wells through the radio waves. After Wells admitted that he knew the chance of failure of the particle accelerator, Barry told Wells he owed Caitlin and Cisco more than an apology, as they stuck around when everyone else abandoned him. Later that night, Barry and Iris had a coffee at Jitters, discussing how people they admire aren't who they seem to be. When Hartley broke out of the prison, Barry rushed to Star Labs, though Hartley had left by then. When Hartley attacked the Keystone Cleveland Dam, Barry rushed over and arrived in time to save a woman who Hartley threw off. Hartley used the data on Barry's molecular scans to stop Barry once he was disarmed. Hartley was then stopped after the team hacked into the frequencies of the cars at the dam to send out waves powerful enough to stop Hartley. When Wells told Barry he wished to regain the trust of the team one day, Barry told him he already had. Due to a timeline change caused when a future version of Barry time-traveled from 2016, most of these events had been erased and replaced by the following. Current timeline. When dealing with Rathaway, Barry was taken away by another version of himself, who tranquilized him and switched their flash emblems in order to temporarily replace him. Barry later awoke and rushed into Star Labs, asking where the other Flash was. The other Barry explained that he was him from the future and was being chased by a time wraith. When older Barry tried to run back to his time, the time wraith caught up to him, so younger Barry attacked it, diverting it long enough to allow his older self to return to the future as the time wraith followed him. Barry saved a couple of people from a burning car. Cisco told Barry he couldn't be mad for dirtying his suit, to which Barry asked when he could start calling it his suit. While Barry was investigating Clay Parker, he was greeted by his father. When Barry brought the DNA samples to Star Labs, they realized Shauna Bays was also involved. Barry and Caitlin discuss how they both don't have much of a social life, where they were interrupted with a sighting of Shauna Bays and Clay Parker. Barry rushed to the scene and was shocked when he learned Shauna could teleport. He was shot at in the neck by Clay Parker, but managed to stop the bullet, though the two escaped. Barry stopped by to help Iris with a report, though she already had plans with Eddie. Barry then decided to drop by a Southside dive bar with Caitlin to check if Shauna and Clay returned to their old habits. After Caitlin had a few drinks, she walked up to the stage drunk and called Barry out to join her. The two then sang Summer Nights, where Caitlin was shocked Barry could sing well. After their duet, Barry was greeted by Linda Park, who offered him her phone number. Barry then took Caitlin back to her apartment and put her to bed. The following day, Barry teased Caitlin for what happened the night before. Barry was called and told that his father had been beaten by Julius. Barry asked who attacked him and went after Julius. Barry broke Julius out and told him he wouldn't return him to prison, causing him to face more time if he didn't give him Clay and Shauna's next heist. After Barry was told they were in St. Louis, Barry decided to leave Julius out for beating his father. While chasing Clay and Shauna, Barry busts out all the lights in the tunnel they were in, disabling Shauna's teleportation abilities and locking her in a one-way glass. Later, Barry decided to call Linda Park and asked her to go on a date. Barry gave Iris information on Clay Parker to use for a report for the Central City Picture News. He then picked Linda up and the two go for a date. That night, Barry went back to Iron Heights to check on his dad. When Henry began putting the pieces together that Barry was the Flash, Barry claimed he would have told his dad if he was the Flash. Barry was then told that the world is dangerous and told to be careful, and that his father was proud of him for saving many lives. Barry took Linda on a dinner date at a Mexican restaurant. While Linda went to wash her hands, Barry was notified of a robbery at a convenience store and quickly settled the robbery. The following day, Barry had another date with Linda, but had to end the date early after Wells and Caitlin spotted Firestorm. Barry tried to stop Firestorm and told him they could help, but Firestorm attacked Barry and flew off. Barry and Caitlin then tried a different approach, bringing Martin Stein's wife along this time, which caused Martin to finally agree to get help. Linda called Barry to break up with him as she felt he didn't care enough in the relationship, as he often ran off and made excuses. Linda told Barry that it's hard to date someone new when you aren't over someone and understood. Barry went to ask Iris why she told Linda he still had feelings for her, and told Iris he no longer had feelings for her. At Star Labs, the team learned that Ronnie and Martin could go nuclear and level the entire city unless the host body was killed. Barry went to offer Ronnie some pleasantries, though Ronnie told Barry he overheard the conversation. Barry went to Central City Picture News and told Linda he was going to eat a ghost pepper if she didn't agree on another date. Barry took a bite after she believed he was bluffing, and Linda agreed to go on another date and offered him some milk. Barry returned to Star Labs, and the team decided to use a quantum splicer on the two to separate them, but learned that Martin had left already. Barry and Caitlin rush over to Martin, and the two told Martin that they have a way to separate them. After the quantum splicer was placed, Firestorm reacted. Believing they had failed, Barry grabbed Caitlin and ran off to safety as an explosion set off. After they got to safety, Caitlin worried that they were exposed to radiation, though Cisco informed them that there was none. They went back and were pleased when they learned they successfully separated and took them back to Star Labs. Joe contacted Barry and informed him what he had learned with Cisco the previous day. They brought the news to Wells, who had told them that time travel is indeed possible. Barry then went to ask more about time travel with Martin Stein, who had suddenly had a panic attack when General Ealing attacked CC Jitters. Barry rushed over to stop Ealing, but the latter used kinetic needles to stop Barry. They later learned that Martin and Ronnie are still connected. Barry asked Joe how he knew whose blood sample to match, and was told that Joe asked Cisco to match the sample with everyone who worked at Star Labs. Barry then told Joe not to worry, as he was sure Wells had nothing to do with his mother's murder. After Martin was captured, the team tracked him down, and Barry, along with Ronnie, went to rescue Martin. Barry was hit with a weaponized phosphorus and began running in circles to burn it off. After Ealing had the upper hand, he prepared to kill Firestorm, though Barry stopped Ealing in time, and Barry returned to Star Labs with Firestorm. Later, Barry told Joe that when the time came, he wouldn't fail like he believed he had in the past, and he would save his mother. After Barry loses a USB drive containing information on various crime scenes and searches for it at Star Labs with little success, his attention was quickly diverted when Cisco told him of a possible metahuman, Mari McCabe, whom Cisco nicknames Vixen. However, Cisco also informs Barry that Vixen was currently living in Detroit, and not knowing what to expect, Barry went to Oliver for help, and the two headed to Detroit to confirm whether or not she was a threat. Flash and Arrow arrived at the house of Mari's foster father, Chuck, but when she saw the vigilantes, she immediately ran and they gave chase. Flash gave chase to Mari, whose speed was just as fast as his, and asked her to stop, but she refused and displayed incredible strength, caused Flash to fly back several blocks, but eventually resumed the chase with Arrow. Vixen then displayed the ability to run up a building, forcing Flash and Arrow to take flight to the rooftops. Despite the combined efforts, Vixen continued to outrun Flash and dodge Arrow's shots, even crushing his arrows with her bare hands. She also displayed the ability to camouflage, but Arrow attempted to restrain her with a jettisoning arrow, but she outran it, only to slip off the side of the building, but then displayed the ability of flight, which highly impressed Flash. As Vixen attempted to fly away, Arrow convinced her to come back as they just wanted to talk, though Flash wanted to handle the talking, claiming to be better at it, but Arrow simply reminded him he just puts metahumans in the pipeline. However, Mari shot down Flash and Arrow's claim that she was a metahuman, claiming that she wasn't in Central City when the particle accelerator exploded, which Felicity was able to confirm. Though Flash was unconvinced, Arrow offered their help to Mari to understand what she could do, but she turned them down as she was uninterested and warned them that if they ever showed up at Chuck's house again, she'd kill them, and flew off. Ignoring her warning, Flash and Arrow returned later to her house, where they discovered she'd become a vigilante herself, and Arrow questioned her intentions to take on Detroit's criminals without training. However, Mari convinced them to let her try things her way for a while, and Arrow agreed and wished her luck, as Flash reminded her they could still help if she needed them to. After she asked if they had an idea of a name for her, Flash told her that Cisco had been calling her Vixen, and he quickly tried to cover up mentioning Cisco, causing Arrow to ask if Barry and Felicity were separated at birth. Arrow also learned that Flash kissed her, causing him to speed off and worry. Barry took Linda bowling, where they bumped into Iris and Eddie. The two joined them, but later, Eddie and Barry were called after a silent alarm went off at the Central City morgue. Barry ran ahead and investigated the crime scene prior to returning as his CSI job, and on his way, he noticed another Flash running beside him. After listening to a recording, they learned that it was Mark Martin who attacked the morgue. The following day, while Barry and Joe were discussing over a drive, they were attacked by Mark Martin, though Barry got Joe to safety in time. Barry and Iris later went to CC Jitters, where the latter told Barry that she suspects Wells had to do with Stag's murder. Barry told Iris that Wells is a great man and she won't find such a story. Barry later told Cisco and Caitlin what he'd heard from Iris, but still denied the fact that Wells had involvement in Stag's disappearance. After Mark attacked the precinct, Barry ran over in time to stop Marden with the wizard's wand, though Mark escaped. The following day, Barry dropped by and conversed with Mason Bridge about Harrison Wells. Barry asked Mason what evidence he had on Wells and was told to read about it like everyone else. After Joe was kidnapped and held hostage by Mark Marden, the latter called Iris to meet him at the waterfront. Barry went to help Iris. Linda stopped by the precinct to talk to Barry, though Barry told Linda that there was something more important, though not what she thought was going on. At the waterfront, realizing the danger, Barry told Iris to get out and get to safety, though Iris confessed her love for Barry. The two of them shared a kiss before Barry revealed his alter ego to Iris. To stop Mark Marden's wave from destroying the city, Barry ran back and forth the seawall to create a barrier of wind, and doing so, he accidentally traveled back in time as he watched his past self run towards the morgue. At the morgue, Barry was confused at what was going on, quickly solving everything. At Star Labs, Barry finished off everyone's sentences, and Wells quickly realized that Barry had traveled back in time. Wells then warned Barry not to alter any events, big or small, as it could cause a cataclysm. Ignoring Wells' instructions, Barry tracked down Mark Marden and brought him to the Star Labs particle accelerator prison. Wells told Barry that even though he may have saved many lives, time would find a way to repair itself. Barry ran as fast as he did previously in an attempt to go back once again, though to no success. At Central City Picture News, Linda told Barry that she knows he still had feelings for Iris and broke up with him, though wished him luck with Iris. Barry then told Mason he knew he suspected something wrong with Wells. Later that night, Barry and Cisco grab a drink, but Barry ended up leaving Cisco with Lisa, unknown to him who she really is. The following day, Barry confessed his feelings to Iris, though to his surprise, she didn't feel the same way. After a report of Snart in the Santini crime family casino, Barry rushed over and held Lisa hostage. Snart told Barry to let her go, as he told Barry he has Cisco hostage. After the two left, Barry returned to the labs as a CSI, where he was punched by Eddie for trying to win Iris over earlier. The following day, Cisco showed up at Star Labs and quit, feeling guilt for revealing Barry's identity. Barry told Cisco he shouldn't feel sorry, but Cisco still felt the guilt. Barry and Caitlin later realized the casino wasn't the target, but a way to trigger a money transfer. Barry chased after Leonard, Lisa, and Mick and captured Leonard. Barry told Leonard he could lock him up for good, but Leonard told him there would be no way of stopping his broadcast of him revealing Barry's identity. Barry told Leonard that if he was good as he claimed he is, he shouldn't need to kill. Barry then told Leonard if he hurt anyone close to him, he would go after him no matter who Leonard told his secret to. At Jitters, Eddie apologized to Barry for hitting him and learned that Caitlin told Iris and Eddie about his lightning psychosis. Barry later went to ask Wells about Stagg, but before he could ask, he saw a report of Mason Bridge missing. He later called Joe and admitted that he was right about Wells.
Discovering Wells' true identity. Barry and Joe discuss Wells, and while Barry believed he could be the Reverse Flash, Joe told Barry that the blood at the house didn't match his. Barry then rushed over to a terrorist attack by Axel Walker, who claimed himself to be the Trickster. They learned that Axel is a copycat of James Jesse, who had killed 10 civilians and 2 cops prior, and now facing life sentences at Iron Heights. Barry and Joe head over to Iron Heights, where James Jesse told them Axel likely found his lair. On their way out, Barry stopped by his father's cell and told him he's gotten closer than he ever had before in investigating his mother's murder. Iris later called the Flash to ask for help on the investigation on Mason Bridge's disappearance. Axel then told them about an address that he had planted a bomb somewhere in Central City. When Barry couldn't find the bomb, Wells told him it was a trick, but Barry refused to listen. As Barry kept looking, Wells' theory was indeed correct, as Axel broke James Jesse out and took Henry Allen hostage. Upset that his father was held hostage and possibly killed, Joe was comforted by Barry, and while the latter no longer trusted Wells, Joe told Barry it didn't matter why Wells was helping, and the only thing that mattered was that he did. After they tracked down the tricksters, Barry ran over, but Axel planted a kinetic bomb so that if Barry didn't run over 600 miles per hour, the bomb would go off. Barry was told by Wells to phase through a wall, but Barry refused to listen. Wells told Barry to feel the power in electricity and that he was now part of a speed force. Barry ran through a truck, getting the kinetic bomb off, and returned to City Hall to give everyone an antidote. Barry then went to rescue his father before knives could drop on him. Barry then confirmed his father's prediction that he is indeed the Flash. At Star Labs, Henry thanked Wells for taking care of Barry, though Barry didn't seem too happy. The two share a hug before Henry was brought back to Iron Heights. At the precinct, Barry revealed his identity to Eddie and told Eddie to get Iris to stop looking in on Mason Bridge. Barry then described Wells' speech and deduced that he is indeed the Reverse Flash. Barry, Eddie, and Joe quickly took down a group of robbers and apprehended them. The following day, they went to Hudson University where Lindsay Kang was stung to death. Barry brought a sample back to Star Labs, and they were soon joined by Felicity and Ray Palmer, though Barry told Felicity it wasn't the best time for a visit. At Jitters, Barry and Felicity were interrupted by Eddie, and the three ended up making dinner plans between Eddie, Felicity, Barry, Ray, and Iris. Soon after, Bill Carlisle was attacked at Folston Tech, but Barry was too late by the time he got there. He was then attacked by Brie Larvin's bees and went unconscious. With a defibrillator Cisco built in, the team regained Barry's consciousness. Later that night at the dinner, Barry informed Felicity who Wells really is after Ray discussed how Wells was his personal hero. After things at dinner went downhill with Eddie and Iris, Barry was called back to Star Labs where they learned the bees were all robotic. At Jitters, Felicity told Barry to inform Caitlin and Cisco about Wells, though Barry told Felicity it could backfire. Barry later told Iris to trust Eddie and that Eddie only wants to keep her in the light. The team later learned Bree went to her next target. Tina McGee and Barry went to Bree's hideout while Ray went to save Tina. Bree sent bees to attack Barry, but Felicity hacked into the software and shut the bees down and restrained Bree. Barry rushed over to Cisco after he was stung by a bee and vibrated his hand to use as a defibrillator. After Tina thanked Barry for the help, Barry asked what happened between her and Wells and learned one day Wells became a completely different person. Barry later called Caitlin and Cisco over and told them about why he and Joe had learned about Wells. When Caitlin was hesitant to believe them, Cisco told them he had dreams of Wells murdering him. Barry ran over to Coast City and returned to Central City with pizza. At Joe's house, they informed the rest of the team that Joe and Cisco are heading to Starling City to investigate Wells. Later, Eddie called Barry when there was a report of a male who was trying to sell jewelry, which was stolen the night before. Barry rushed over but learned the man was a shape-shifting metahuman. When the team feared the metahuman could copy Barry's powers, they told him to keep his hands off of it. When Caitlin went to Wells' mansion, Barry rushed over and took her away and told her not to tell Wells anything. Eddie and Barry went to contact Mrs. Bates, though soon realized it was actually Hannibal Bates. After Hannibal framed Eddie, Barry ran Eddie out of the precinct and told him Star Labs could keep him off the grid until they cleared his name. But Eddie told him to do it the right way, and Barry returned him to the precinct. Barry later got a visit from Eddie and was told Captain Singh called in a favor. As Barry turned his back, Eddie, who is actually Hannibal, hit Barry and hid him. Barry was later found by Caitlin and they returned to Star Labs. Caitlin presented Barry with a serum which could disable his shape-shifting abilities. They then got a ping from Barry's phone at the airport and Barry ran over. Barry quickly spotted Hannibal and the two fought before Hannibal was shot with the serum. Barry later gave DA Cecile a full list of everyone Hannibal had impersonated. Later, Joe and Cisco presented with their discovery in Starling City the corpse of the real Harrison Wells. Upon seeing this, Barry realized that Tina's words about Wells being a different person were true, as the Wells they knew was an imposter. While Cisco was looking through the schematics of Star Labs, they spotted a hidden room. As they entered the room, they saw the Reverse Flash suit as well as an article from 2024 reporting the disappearance of the Flash. They realized that Wells was from the future. Barry, Caitlin, and Cisco were then greeted by Gideon, who told Barry of his future. Barry, hoping to get some information out of it, asked why Wells came to this timeline. Gideon revealed the grim, cold hard truth. He came here to kill Barry. When they learned Wells was on his way, Barry asked why he killed Nora Allen that night. Gideon revealed that he did so out of anger after Barry escaped from him. When Wells was heading to the time vault, they left. The team then helped Cisco see his dream properly by constructing glasses that allow lucid dreaming. At the precinct, Eddie asked Barry to ask Joe why he did not give his blessing for his proposal to Iris. Later, while Cisco was in his lucid dream, the team learned Wells' true identity, Eobard Thawne, who called them shortly after Cisco woke up. Eobard told him of a fire that just broke out and Barry rushed over. When Barry was unsure what to do, Eobard guided him to use his arms like a vacuum by rotating them fast enough. Later, Eobard told Barry that the only thing stopping him from achieving his goals was himself. Barry later told Joe that they need to recreate the events that happened in Cisco's dream. At Star Labs, Cisco rigged the force field so instead of keeping a speedster in, it kept him out, which Barry had tested. Later, when Eobard returned from his lecture, Eobard managed to enter the force field. As he prepared to kill Cisco, Joe fired 3 bullets at him, though Barry stopped most of them. The final one Barry was unable to reach, and Eobard was shot and killed. Barry was upset that Eobard would never be able to confess. However, it turned out to be Hannibal Bates. They were then reminded by Eobard that he was always one step ahead. Barry told Eobard he could kill him if he'd just let his father out, but Eobard told Barry he needed Barry alive. Sisko got a ping from Eobard's time vault, and Barry ran over. Barry learned Eobard had cameras everywhere and had access to CCTV footage. Barry warned the team before running over to save Eddie and Iris. Eobard captured Eddie as Barry arrived. Barry told Iris everything was going to be okay and swore that he would bring Eddie home. As he ran off, Barry sent a static shock, much like he had when he was in a coma, as Iris realized who the Flash really is. Barry looked everywhere for Eddie, but to no success. When Captain Singh asked where Eddie was, Barry and Joe told him that Eddie was taking personal time off. When the Gold Reserve was being attacked by Grodd, who had controlled Ealing, Barry ran over but was quickly stopped as Grodd whammied both Ealing and Barry. Back at Star Labs, the team was greeted by Iris, much to the team's shock. Barry explained to Iris that there had been many times he wanted to tell Iris's secret, but learned that Joe was right. Barry and the CCPD later set a trap and captured Ealing. They locked him in the metahuman prison and learned that he was controlled by Grodd. With the help of Iris, they learn of sewer workers going missing, and Barry, Joe, and Sisko head down to look for Grodd. Barry was whammied and knocked unconscious, and Joe was kidnapped by Grodd. Later, Barry had Sisko build a tech so that Grodd couldn't get into his head again. When Iris told Barry that he had been lying to her on things that mattered most, Barry told Iris she had been lying about her feelings for him also. Barry cut himself off when he realized he couldn't have told Iris about the other timeline. Barry went 5.3 miles away from Grodd and ran toward him in an attempt for a supersonic punch, though he failed as Grodd cut his distance down. Grodd threw Barry on a train track, and as Barry's tech broke, Grodd got into Barry's mind once again. As a train went toward Barry, Iris told Barry that he could defeat Grodd and save Joe. Inspired by Iris' words, Barry got out of the tracks on time and as the train passed, challenged Grodd. As Grodd jumped toward him, Barry got out of the way, and another train passed and hit Grodd. Barry saved Joe and freed Ealing from the metahuman prison. Barry later told Iris that it's the thought of her that always kept him going. Iris then told Barry that she did have feelings for him, but Eddie is her boyfriend and missing. Barry then told Iris that he would do his best to bring him back. After continuously searching, Barry told Iris he still had yet to find Eddie, but promised he was trying his best. Barry was then called by Sisko, who had learned Eobard had been using his wheelchair to absorb Barry's speed. When they learned that the particle accelerator was turned on, they realized the reason they couldn't find Eddie and Eobard was because Eobard was holding Eddie hostage at Star Labs. When they opened the particle accelerator, Eobard escaped and Barry chased after him, though Eobard got away. Later, Barry apologized to Eddie for not finding him sooner. Barry said they needed to get the metahumans out, as even though they are dangerous, they don't deserve to die. Barry suggested they transfer them to the Supermax on Leon U. Desperate, Barry looked to Leonard Snart to help transfer the metahumans under one condition: Barry erase all criminal records of him, though Joe was very disappointed that Barry looked to such lengths. They had the metahumans placed in a truck owned by Sisko's family, and used the device from Eobard's wheelchair to disable the metahumans' powers temporarily. Once they reached the hangar, the metahumans had escaped and began attacking Barry, Sisko, Caitlin, and Joe. They then learned it was Leonard who had sabotaged the truck and let the metahumans escape. Leonard told Barry he had done so as they all now owe him and could be useful as a part of his rogues gallery. When Barry asked why he had spared them, Leonard told him he now owes him as well. At Star Labs, Barry felt guilty that his plan had failed and wondered how Oliver could do whatever it took to get what he needed. The particle accelerator was then fully charged and online. Eobard approached Star Labs and Barry ran out to face him. Eobard told Barry he couldn't stop him if he had tried, as Eobard was always faster. Barry was then joined by Firestorm and Oliver. Barry and Eobard faced off as Oliver tried to get a clear shot at Eobard. Barry was thrown towards a Star Labs sign, and as Eobard used his hands as a vacuum to blow Firestorm away, Barry ran over to grab Firestorm. Barry ran back and stopped Eobard before he could kill Oliver. Barry and Eobard fought on the roof of Star Labs, and Eobard was thrown off Star Labs by Firestorm. Eobard was then shot by Oliver with another nanite arrow, disabling Eobard's speed and making him unconscious. Barry thanked Oliver and Firestorm for their help and looked over at Eobard, finally taking down the man who murdered his mother. Barry asked Eobard why he murdered his mother. Eobard told him that he hates him for something Barry had done in the future. He reveals that killing Nora was not his original intention, as he really went back 15 years to kill Barry when he was still a child. when Barry got his past self to safety, Thawne was so angry that he took it out on Nora by killing her. Eobard then told both of them that they could get what they want. Barry could return to save his mother, which would allow Eobard to return to his time. Barry presented this information to the team, who all agreed he should do so. Barry asked Joe why he was so supportive, and Joe told him that though he had been a great son, he wants Barry growing up with his mother and his real father. Barry told his father he could save his mother, but Henry told him it was too dangerous due to the repercussions of time travel. Iris told Barry she knew of a possible future of them being married, and joked she was never a fan of hyphenated names. Eobard explained how Barry was going to go back to the night his mother was murdered. He warned Barry that he could die if he didn't reach the right velocity. Later, Barry was informed that as well as dying, Barry could cause a singularity which could destroy Earth and continue even after the Earth is gone. Barry, along with the rest of the team, attended Ronnie and Caitlin's wedding before Barry prepared to save his mother. Barry said his goodbyes to his friends and foster family. Barry was then told he had 1 minute and 52 seconds, otherwise a singularity would form. Eobard told Barry he holds both of their futures and then told him to run. As Barry ran, he saw the past, present, and future before traveling back to the night his mother was murdered. When Barry arrived at that night, Barry looked on as his future self battled Eobard. His future self then signaled him to stay back, and Barry looked away as his future self rescued his younger self, and Eobard murdered his mother. When Eobard had left, he went and told his mother that he and his father turned out to be okay. His mother looked at him, proud of her son, and Barry tells her goodbye, before she dies in front of him, her last words being, "Goodbye, Barry." Barry returned and broke Eobard's time machine. Eobard asked why he didn't save his mother and have everything he wanted, and Barry told Eobard he already has. Barry and Eobard battled, though Eobard quickly had the upper hand. When Eobard said he was going to kill all his friends and family, Eddie shot himself and Eobard fell back. Cisco quickly realized that Eobard was being erased from existence, and before Eobard vanished, Eobard told Barry he controlled his life all his life, and wondered how he would go on without him. A singularity formed in the particle accelerator and the team rushed out. As they watched the singularity eat Central City, Barry told the team he had to try and stop it, even with little chance of success. Barry ran through Central City and jumped towards the singularity. As he stabilized the singularity, Firestorm flew towards it, and Barry watched as the two separated, causing the singularity to close. As Martin Stein plummeted to the ground, Barry caught him. When Caitlin arrived at their location and learned Ronnie didn't make it, Barry hugged Caitlin and looked towards the sky. For the next 6 months, Barry lived in solitude, blaming Eddie and Ronnie's deaths on himself. Going solo. Eobard Thawne, as Harrison Wells, left Star Labs to Barry in his will. Yet 6 months after the issue with the singularity, Barry had still not dealt with the mail he'd been getting regarding the property. Flash Day. Barry investigated the crime scene involving the death of Al Rothstein. Barry identified that Rothstein was strangled by someone large, though assured Joe that it wasn't Grodd. That night, Barry cleaned up jitters from the destruction caused by the singularity. Iris arrived and joked that Barry should be a contractor, as she noticed night after night buildings had been rebuilt. Barry told Iris he wasn't going to his rally, though Iris told him he should just go as the citizens of Central City deserved to see the man who saved the city. Barry then told Iris he wasn't the man who saved the city. After Iris left, Barry remembered it was Firestorm who closed the singularity, causing the death of Ronnie Raymond. The following day during his rally, Barry decided to show and accept the key to the city, much to the city's joy. As the key was handed over, Atom Smasher threw a grill toward the mayor, though Barry got the mayor away in time. After Atom Smasher grew, the Flash picked up and threw 2 propane tanks for Joe to shoot. After the tanks exploded, Atom Smasher shrank and his mask unfolded. Barry and Joe noticed that he resembled Al Rothstein, and Atom Smasher fled. Later at the precinct, Greg Turk from Weathersby and Stone LLP gave Eobard's last will on a USB, stating it was meant only for him to view. Barry then had an alert of an unauthorized entry in Star Labs, only to learn it was his team in the building. Barry told his team he didn't want them there, though he was told by Joe that he needed his friends. After Atom Smasher was tracked, Barry ran out with his flash suit, leaving the communication system behind. After landing a few hits on Atom Smasher, the latter grew and strangled Barry with ease. After Cisco caused a distraction by setting off the alarms, Barry managed to escape and run back to Star Labs, though he passed out soon after. When he woke up, Joe told Barry that he couldn't blame himself on the death of Eddie and Ronnie, and that it was on the entire team. Barry then went to Caitlin to apologize for not saving Ronnie, though Caitlin told Barry it was her fault, as at one point, Ronnie asked her to get away from Central City, though she refused. Barry and Caitlin then watched Eobard's last will, where he confessed to murdering Nora. Barry and Caitlin returned to Star Labs, and the former told the team that he realized that the only way to stop Atom Smasher was as a team. Barry attracted Atom Smasher with a flash signal. Barry had Atom Smasher chase him to a local plant, where the former trapped the latter in an enclosed room, forcing Atom Smasher to absorb more radiation than he could. Barry asked Atom Smasher why he wanted to kill him, and Atom Smasher told Barry that a man named Zoom would have brought him home if he killed him. Later, Barry then greeted his father at Iron Heights and brought him to Joe West's home, where Henry was greeted with a surprise party. Barry pulled his father aside to discuss future plans, though his father told him they can't live a life together as he didn't want to get in the way of his son being a hero. Meeting Jay Garrick. At Star Labs, Barry was told of his upgraded suit and the increased security when they were interrupted by Jay Garrick, who warned them on an oncoming danger in the form of the evil speed demon named Zoom. Barry was told by Jay that when the Singularity formed, it created a breach between both their worlds. Barry was then told by Jay that he was the Flash of his world. Jay told the team that he lost his powers, and Barry asked Jay how he had lost them. Barry then told the team to do tests on Jay, warning Jay that he could have more enemies if they learned that what he said was false. Barry later discussed with the team that nothing Jay said added up. Martin Stein then presented the team with the multiverse theory, telling them that they need to find the breach and close it. Barry was later told by Caitlin that she ran a lie detector test while testing Jay, and he passed it. Barry, still reluctant to believe Jay, told Caitlin to continue running tests. Barry locked Jay in the metahuman prison and was told by the latter that he only wants to help, not harm. Barry was then told by Cisco about a fire, and Barry ran off to extinguish it. Soon after he extinguished the fire, he was attacked by Eddie Slick. Barry went to tackle Eddie, but Slick got away with his powers. The following day, Barry returned to the scene as part of his job. Barry deduced that the fire was from an arsonist, and was then greeted by Patty Spivot, who claimed to be a big fan of his due to his forensic reports. Patty told Barry she'd been trying to crack Joe's no-code, and asked for any advice as she knew Barry grew up with Joe as his father. Barry told her that it was unfortunate as he'd been trying to pick that since he was 11. Later, Barry told Patty that he would try to put in a good word for her. Joe told Barry that the Eddie Slick they have in custody is proven innocent. Joe asked if it was possible whether the Slick that had started the fire was from Earth 2. Despite evidence piecing together, Barry told the team he still refused to trust Jay. When Cisco said Jay was right about Zoom, Barry reminded Cisco that they don't even know anything about Zoom. After Barry told the team they need to be extra careful, Iris pulled him aside. Iris told Barry she knew he's only being extra cautious because of Eobard Thawne. Iris reminded Barry that not everyone is the same, and only he was able to defeat him because he trusted in others. After Eddie Slick took Patty Spivot hostage, Barry looked to Jay for help. Jay said the only way he could stop Slick was by hurling lightning at him, as lightning and sand create glass. For an hour, Barry ran in circles and hurled lightning at a dummy, with Jay continuously telling him to go slower so he could direct the lightning accurately. Cisco and Martin Stein then reported on Slick's whereabouts. Barry then told Jay that they could distract Slick with Jay, as Slick is unaware Jay lost his powers. The team returned Jay Garrick's helmet, and the two Flashes joined hands before leaving to rescue Patty. While Jay distracted Slick, Barry saved Patty from a concussion bomb. When Slick grabbed Jay by the throat, Barry ran in circles around Slick and successfully hurled lightning towards him, turning him into glass and shattering him. Later, Barry apologized to Jay for not trusting him because of a former mentor. Later, Martin Stein told the team that the most significant breach was in Star Labs, but shortly after, Martin collapsed. Snart family issues. While doing forensic work at the Central City Police Department, Barry was called by Iris, who was at Baldwin Tower investigating a real estate scam. Barry told Iris to jump out of the window as Barry ran over to catch her. As Barry got Iris to safety, Barry ran back to the tower and subdued the two men. At Star Labs, Barry and the team investigated the wormhole in the basement. Barry was told they tried sending objects in, but they've all jumped back. Barry told the team Zoom may have been able to cross worlds due to him being a speedster, and Barry may be able to attempt to cross the breach. Unfortunately, Barry bounced back like the objects. The team deduced that there's a hallway between the portals which continuously moves, therefore they need to create a speed cannon. Martin then told the team that they should all rest for the day. The following day at the grand reopening of CC Jitters, Barry was shocked when he learned a beverage was named after him. Barry ran into Patty and they briefly conversed. Lisa Snart then bumped into the team, asking Cisco for the Flash's help as her brother was kidnapped. At Star Labs, the Flash asked Lisa why they should trust her due to them previously double-crossing them. When Cisco tracked Snart, the Flash told Lisa that they would see if she was lying and ran off. When Barry arrived, he found Snart, though he seemed fine. When Barry told Snart that his sister thinks he's kidnapped, Snart froze him. Barry was then introduced to Snart's father as the two left. Cisco then used the thermal threading he used on Barry's new suit to melt the ice. Barry returned to Star Labs and told Lisa that Leonard wasn't kidnapped and was doing work with their father. When the team asked why they should trust her for a final time, Lisa showed them a scar that was given to her by her father. Barry approached Leonard at a bar and asked why he was working with a man he despised. He told Barry things were complicated, but Barry asked what was wrong so he could help. Barry told Snart he may have a code of honor now, but his father doesn't, leaving no choice but to stop the two. Snart reminded Barry that he could still reveal his secret and left Barry to pay for his bill. Later, Barry was told by Joe that he had lied about his wife as she had never died. Barry assured Joe that it was for the best, as Iris may have gone down the wrong path with Francine West, giving Leonard Snart as an example. Barry then told Joe that he should still tell Iris the truth. The following day, Barry, Joe, and Patty investigate a body that was decapitated. Patty asked if it could have been done by a metahuman, but Barry told her it wasn't. Barry then quickly discovered that Leonard is only working for his father as Lewis planted thermite in Lisa. Barry contacted the team, who discovered Lisa was indeed injected with thermite. When Barry and Caitlin searched for the thermite with a magnet, Cisco told them to stop as the magnet could set off the thermite. While Cisco told the team he would search for a way to extract it, Barry told the team he should volunteer to replace Lewis Snart's new tech guy. Barry met with Leonard and told him of his plan. When their father arrived, Barry introduced himself as Sam and volunteered to join the team. To prove himself, Barry told Lewis that he had helped his son steal the Kondak Dynasty diamond the previous year. Barry, Lewis, and Leonard arrived for a heist. When their IDs were failing, Barry told the security guards that they should let them go before the managers start making complaints about the clogged toilets. When they arrived at the 27th floor, they find two security guards and Barry ran to subdue them as Leonard and Lewis argued. After Barry hacked into the security lock, Lewis fired a bullet at Barry, though Barry caught the bullet and faked being shot. Before Lewis and Leonard could get away, Barry intervened. Lewis told Leonard to fire his cold gun at him or Lisa dies. Barry told Lewis that the bomb was extracted by Lisa and Barry and was then shocked when Leonard killed his father. As Leonard looked over at his father, Barry took Leonard's cold gun, leaving him to be arrested. Barry paid a visit to Leonard at Iron Heights, telling him that he has good inside of him. As Barry left Iron Heights, Joe told him that he had taken his advice and told Iris of Francine. At Jitters, Barry ran into Patty yet again and was given her number. At Star Labs, the team learned that Jay Garrick had completed the speed cannon. Before he left, the team managed to convince him to stay until they defeat Zoom. Finding a new Firestorm. Barry and the Star Labs team aided Martin Stein, who had yet another reaction. After Cisco used the stabilizer Eobard had used on his wheelchair, Barry was told the stabilizer would be transferred over to a power cane. Caitlin then told Barry that she had found potential candidates that could be compatible with Stein. Barry then ran over to the two, quickly snatching blood samples from them for Caitlin to further examine if they are indeed compatible with Stein. Barry was later told by Perry Spivot of a man-shark sighting. When Patty asked if they could work on the case together, Barry told her he isn't into metahumans, though he told her he would run tests on the shark tooth. Barry was then called back to Star Labs, where he debated with Caitlin on who was more compatible for Stein. Barry pointed out that Jefferson Jackson had the physical attributes, and his alleles matched more than those of Harry Hewitt. Caitlin told Barry that Hewitt is a scientist and someone who is trying to make something for his life. Barry and Stein went to Jackson, telling him they're an agency collecting data on everyone affected by the particle accelerator. He told them that he didn't like talking about it, as that was the night his life fell apart. Barry gave him their number and asked him to think on it. When Barry and Stein returned to Star Labs, they found Hewitt. When Stein and Hewitt made an attempt to merge, they were unsuccessful. Jax later accepted his offer and arrived at Star Labs, where Barry revealed that they couldn't fix his knee. The team then told Jackson he could be a hero, though when they told him he'd need to merge with Stein, Jackson left. After Caitlin scolded Jackson for turning down being a hero, Barry told Caitlin that a decision like that can't be made lightly. Later, Barry told Patty the shark tooth had human DNA. Barry was later told by Joe that he was aware of his feelings for Patty. Barry told Joe that she's great, but not Iris. After Henry Hewitt went on a rampage, the team found his police record. After Jax accepted his destiny as Firestorm, Barry, Stein, and Jax left to face off Henry Hewitt. They managed to evade his attacks until he became unstable and blew his fuse. Barry and Firestorm then brought Hewitt to the pipeline. The following day, the team said their goodbyes to Stein and Jax as the two left for Pittsburgh. Later that night, Barry ran off and watched Patty from a distance. When he was caught off guard, the man-shark grabbed him and told him Zoom wanted him dead. As Patty walked out, she shot the man-shark several times, and the man-shark dropped Barry. The man-shark was suddenly shot by a hooded man. Barry chased after the man, who unveiled his hood, and Barry was shocked at seeing the face of Harrison Wells. Meeting Earth 2 Wells. Barry brought Harrison Wells of Earth 2 to Star Labs. Barry asked if he had any evidence he was from Earth 2, and Wells presented the team with Caitlin's bag, which Martin Stein threw into the portal. Cisco asked if he could be trusted, and Barry told him that Wells saved his life. Barry proceeded to ask why, and Wells told him it was to help him stop Zoom. Joe arrived and fired multiple bullets at Wells, though Barry caught them all. Barry pulled Joe aside, telling him that this was Wells from Earth 2 and not Eobard Thawne. Joe asked how Barry could even look at him, and Barry told Joe that he had to resist the urge to kill him. Barry took Cisco to Jitters, though Cisco expected alcohol rather than coffee. The two were interrupted by Patty, who told the two that she was right about King Shark. Barry was asked if he could help Patty with a police report, but he told her he was too busy. After Patty left, Cisco asked why Barry hadn't asked her out yet. Barry asked Cisco when was the last time Cisco asked a girl for their number. Cisco made an attempt to ask Kendra Saunders out, but was shut down. Cisco then had a vision of Dr. Light robbing Central City Bank and immediately reported to Barry. Barry asked how Cisco knew, but Cisco told him just to hurry. When Barry arrived, Dr. Light used a blast of energy to escape. Barry managed to get a few civilians to safety, though Dr. Light escaped. Back at Star Labs, Wells told Barry that she was a small-time thief on Earth 2. He suggested they capture her and use her as bait against Zoom. Jay barged in and told him that Wells is insane. He told Barry that though Dr. Light is a thief, she isn't a killer and can be reasoned with. At the CCPD precinct, Barry asked Patty on a date, which she agreed to. Later, the team tracked down Dr. Light. When Barry went to confront her, he told her that they could protect her from Zoom. Dr. Light told him that no one could protect her from Zoom, and she flashed a light at Barry. Barry asked if she could just have a normal conversation, and Dr. Light agreed. Dr. Light unmasked herself, and Barry hesitated, seeing Linda Park. After saying her name, a confused Dr. Light blinded Barry and fled. Fearing Dr. Light may go after her Earth 1 doppelganger, Barry told them that they should look after her. After crashing into Caitlin and multiple objects, Jay and Caitlin told Barry to stay behind as they volunteered to look after Linda. Later, Barry went on his date with Patty wearing sunglasses with built-in cameras for Cisco to guide him. Though he went on with the date smoothly, Patty eventually told Barry she knew he was blind. Barry told Patty he had his pupils dilated prior and didn't want to cancel. After the date, the two kiss and Barry regained his sight, complimenting Patty's dress. The two were then called to report to Central City Picture News after Eric Larkin was killed by Dr. Light. At Star Labs, Jay apologized to Barry as he never thought Dr. Light would ever kill. After Wells argued with Jay, the two fought, though Barry stopped the two. After Barry told Wells he had retrieved Dr. Light's mask, Wells revealed to the team that Cisco is indeed a metahuman, using his next-gen watch to prove so. Barry asked why Cisco never told them, and Cisco told the team he was going to eventually. After failed attempts at using his powers to locate Dr. Light, Wells forced it on Cisco. Cisco told Barry Dr. Light was trying to leave town at the South Plaza train station. Barry left and confronted Dr. Light once more. After evacuating the train station, he asked how was he supposed to stop Dr. Light. Wells told him to confuse Dr. Light by creating speed mirages. Barry told Wells he wasn't able to, but Wells told him if he was able to travel through time, he should have no problem creating the afterimages. Barry went on and created speed mirages, but Dr. Light sent a blast of light around her, knocking Barry away. Barry told him he couldn't do it, but Jay told him he could. Barry went on to create the afterimages once more and knocked Dr. Light out. After locking Dr. Light up in the pipeline, Barry told them that they should listen to Wells and use Linda as bait. A frustrated Jay told them once more that they can't trust Wells, as he has as many secrets as the one that they knew. At Jitters, after Caitlin suggested Cisco should have a nickname, Barry suggested the name Vibe. First battle against Zoom. Barry asked Dr. Light for help to stop Zoom, though Light urged him not to, though she eventually agreed. Barry told the team of the trap, while Harrison Wells told them he developed a serum that could dampen Zoom's speed. Barry and Joe were then called to the CCPD precinct. At the CCPD, Barry was told by Patty that Joe shut her down on a case and asked if it was because of their kiss, though Barry told her he never told him. After Dr. Light escaped, Barry rushed over to Star Labs but was too late. In fear of Dr. Light going after Earth 1 Linda again,
Barry had Iris take Linda into her home. Barry and Joe then had an argument that they shouldn't go after Zoom just yet. Barry reminded Joe that he'd always said it's good to play offense rather than defense at times, but Joe told him that that was for football tryouts. At Iris's house, Barry suggested they use Linda to lure Zoom, though realizing what he was saying was wrong, Iris told him it was a good idea. At Star Labs, Barry greeted Linda. The Star Labs team took Linda on a practice run. After a few attempts, Linda eventually succeeded. When he went to high-five Linda, she accidentally fired a blast of light to him, though he managed to evade it. Later, Joe told Barry that Linda wasn't ready, but Barry told him otherwise. Later that night, the Flash went to visit Linda. When Linda said she wasn't ready, the Flash told her she's one of the strongest women he knew. When she asked what he based that on, he revealed his identity. The following day, Patty asked Barry if he could go out for dinner, but Barry told her he had something else to take care of that night. At night, Barry and Linda faked a battle where Linda was victorious, though Zoom never showed. Later, when Zoom eventually arrived and kidnapped Linda, Barry ran over. Zoom told him that he wasn't the only one that fished with bait, and proceeded to drop Linda off of the roof of Star Labs. Barry ran down and caught her. Barry then ran around Star Labs in circles and hurled lightning at Zoom, though Zoom caught the lightning and hurled it back at him. Barry then made an attempt for a free-fall fight for equal velocity, though Zoom still came out on top. Zoom proceeded to beat Barry and broke his spine. When Wells tried shooting Zoom with the speed dampening serum, Zoom caught it and used it against Barry. Zoom then dragged Barry to Central City Picture News and the CCPD, announcing that their hero had been defeated. Barry was dragged back to Star Labs, where Zoom shoved his claw-like hands into Barry's abdomen, rendering Barry unconscious. When Barry woke up, he was told that Linda left for Coast City. Barry then told the team he couldn't feel his legs. Grodd returns. Barry began walking around with a cane. At one point, he made an attempt to walk without it, but to no success. Barry asked how much longer until he should recover, and Caitlin told him he was almost completely healed. When Wells told the team he was returning to his Earth, Caitlin tried to stop him, but Barry told her to let him be. When Cisco had a reminder of his date, Barry teased him. Barry then had a call from Patty, who offered to make him chicken soup for his sickness. Barry went to test his speed on the treadmill. When he tried to push himself, he had flashbacks of being defeated by Zoom and soon collapsed. When Joe asked what was up, Barry told Joe that he couldn't get over being destroyed by Zoom. Barry then told Joe he felt as if the city no longer sees him as the man strong enough to protect it. Later, Joe alerted Barry and Cisco that Grodd had returned. The three chased after Caitlin, but were too late. Barry felt guilty he couldn't do anything about it, but Joe told him that there was nothing he could do to help Caitlin. Later, when Barry ran on the treadmill again, he was greeted by his father, who was called by Iris. Barry caught up with his father and was told that it's good to slow down to get back to where he wanted to be. They were then interrupted by Cisco, who had found where Grodd was hiding. When Cisco told Barry he had a plan, Wells revealed himself in Eobard's suit and Barry tackled him. Cisco quickly rushed over and reminded Barry that that was a different person, and Barry quickly apologized. Barry introduced Wells to his father and told him he would explain Earth 2 to him later. While Cisco and Wells went looking for Caitlin, Barry was told by Henry he saw what happened against Zoom. He told him that though the city may not believe in him, he would get through it as he had himself when he was framed for Nora's murder. Barry was told that he needed to accept it and believe in himself to get through anything. Barry was also told that him believing his innocence when he was a kid gave him all the hope that he needed. When Wells and Caitlin returned to Star Labs, Wells suggested they should send Grodd through a breach, which would bring him the closest to home he could be. The team had Caitlin lure Grodd, and as soon as Grodd caught her attention, Barry got her out of the way. Barry told Grodd that if he wanted Caitlin, he would have to catch him first, and Barry ran toward the area of the breach. When Grodd caught up, Barry once again had flashbacks of being defeated by Zoom and was knocked down by Grodd. Barry was pinned down by Grodd with a single foot and was asked where Caitlin was. Caitlin revealed herself and told him they now understand what he wanted. Grodd released his foot from Barry and the team turned the speed cannon on, opening the breach, and Barry took Caitlin to safety. When Grodd resisted going through, Barry ran around the city and supersonic punched him into the breach. At Star Labs, Barry asked if Cisco could reverse engineer the Eobard's reverse flash ring so he wouldn't need to carry a bag around, in which Wells said he could help. At Joe's house, Barry, Joe, and Iris showed Henry photos of Barry growing up with them. When Joe told Barry Patty wasn't buying his sick story, Henry asked if Patty was his girlfriend. Barry told him he would tell him about her on the way to the bus station. At the CCPD, Barry explained the reason he was keeping secrets was because his father was in town, and he was afraid that Patty wouldn't have a good image of him, despite his conviction being overturned. Patty told Barry that she isn't that kind of person. Barry told her he should have given her more credit, but Patty told him he should have given himself more credit. Barry and Patty then share a kiss. Vandal Savage. Determined to defeat Zoom, Barry continued to hone his speed. However, he quickly realized that he was not getting any faster, which Wells confirmed by pointing out that there were a number of reasons Zoom was faster and stronger than Barry. Barry, however, concluded that they would just need to figure it out fast. He then went off to meet Patty. The next day, Barry told Joe and Patty that a recent murder at the docks was committed by one man, with the only evidence found being traces of a crystal that broke off of the killer's knives. Later at Jitters, Cisco and Kendra were attacked by the same man. Barry came to their aid and saved Cisco when the man threw a knife at him, which Barry stopped. This resulted in a grateful Cisco accidentally revealing Barry's identity to Kendra, much to Barry's irritation. Later at Star Labs, Barry and the team determined that the man who attacked them was the same one who killed the others at the docks, with Barry noticing that the daggers were centuries old and that the man kept referring to Kendra as Priestess Shayara, and seemed to know her despite Kendra claiming she grew up in Wisconsin and had never left the States. Knowing that the police could not protect Kendra, Barry decided to go to Oliver and his team for help in Star City. Barry proceeded to rescue Oliver, Thea, and Diggle from Damien Dark and his soldiers from Hive. At the new foundry, Kendra was introduced to the rest of the Arrow team. When Thea suggested a description of the mysterious man, Barry used his abilities to draw a sketch of the man. Felicity proceeded to use facial recognition software to find a match. When she did, she discovered that the only known photo of the man was from 1975, meaning that the man should be at least in his 80s. Oliver proceeded to question Kendra more. When his questioning started to get harsh, Barry stepped in, only for Oliver to point out that by asking them to help protect Kendra and by bringing her to Star City, Barry put all of them in possible danger. Felicity proceeded to calm him down and suggested they all go back home to relax and catch up. At Oliver's loft, Barry and Felicity proceeded to catch up and tell each other about what changes had happened recently in their lives. Barry then proceeded to go to Oliver and apologize, only for Oliver himself to apologize and tell him that he was glad Barry came to them for help, as it showed real maturity, something Oliver claimed he lacked. Soon after, Oliver made a toast about how great it was to see everyone again. Later, Barry went to Cisco to reassure him that they would keep Kendra safe. Cisco proceeded to tell him that when he kissed Kendra, he got a vibe of seeing her with wings like a bird and a suit to match. When Barry asked him why he didn't share this information sooner, Cisco told him it was because he thought it was unrelated until now, and asked Barry not to tell her about his powers. Not wanting to risk damaging their relationship, Barry agreed not to say anything. Suddenly, the man broke through the window of the loft. Barry quickly fetched Oliver's bow and arrows, but the attacker began throwing knives at everyone, forcing Oliver to engage him while Barry protected everyone. Eventually, Oliver managed to shoot 2 arrows into the man's shoulders, but Thea impulsively shot the man in the chest and he fell off the balcony. To their surprise, however, the man was nowhere to be found. Back at the foundry, the group tried to find out more about the mysterious man until Barry suggested they use Cisco's powers. Cisco proceeded to tell Kendra about his abilities and the vision he got of her. Suddenly, Malcolm Merlin and the League of Assassins appeared and revealed the man's name was Vandal Savage, an immortal who has lived over centuries. Malcolm told them they could not protect Kendra, but Barry told Malcolm he was wrong and that they could. Later, when Hawkman abducted Kendra, Green Arrow and Flash searched for her and found Hawkman, and the two engaged him. He proved capable of fighting them both. After working together, they managed to subdue Hawkman and brought him back to the foundry where they questioned him. But he was only interested in Kendra, who he also addressed as Shayara. Upon being asked, the man identified himself as Carter Hall, but revealed that he was really the Egyptian prince Khufu, and he and Shayara were lovers who have reincarnated over the centuries after their deaths to find each other in life. Carter also revealed that Savage has, for centuries, hunted down both Kendra and himself and has killed them 206 times, as their life force is tethered to his, and every time he kills them, he becomes stronger with his immortality and healing reinforced. Barry was confident that they could kill Vandal, but Malcolm arrived again to inform them Savage had left and was now searching for the Staff of Horus, which would make him near impossible to defeat. Carter suggested that he be allowed to show Kendra how to activate her powers and memories. Going to the top of a building, Carter suggested Kendra jump off to unlock her potential. When she began to hesitate, Carter pushed her, only for Barry to save her. When he suggested she try again, Barry and Cisco refused. Oliver then pulled Barry aside and asked why he was acting the way he was, with Barry admitting that he felt the rules of how they stop evil keeps changing, and how even with powers he still feels powerless. Oliver told Barry, however, that he had already done enough, and after making a joke about Kendra giving him a lift back to Central City, they realized that's where the staff was located after remembering Kendra felt drawn to Central City, and came to the conclusion that both her and Carter are attracted to the items that destroy them or are from their past. Felicity located the staff at a church in Central City. Oliver and Barry raced towards Central City to try and stop Savage, only for him to beat them to it. Oliver and Barry proceeded to try and take the staff away from Savage, only for him to overpower them with the staff's power. Savage proceeded to blow the church up using the staff, with Barry racing both him and Oliver to safety. Doubting Savage blew himself up, the two considered the current situation a tie. As Malcolm Merlyn arranged a meeting to negotiate with Savage, along with Green Arrow and the Flash, while running to the meeting, Barry saw a transparent version of himself come out of a wormhole before dissipating, hinting that he would travel back in time soon. Savage demanded Kendra and Carter, or Central and Star City, would be annihilated. As Cisco developed gloves to take the Staff of Horus from Savage to kill him, Barry and Oliver go and free Kendra and Carter before Savage kills them. Kendra's powers don't work, leading to her and Carter's death, making Savage near impossible to hurt. Barry uses the staff against him to little effect along with Oliver. Oliver tells Barry to run, as he's fast enough, before Savage takes the staff and wipes out Central City with a magical blast, but not before Barry runs through a wormhole to allow him to relive the last day. With encouragement from Oliver, Barry helps fix what went wrong before, allowing him and Green Arrow to vaporize Savage into ash with the staff, destroying the weapon itself and ending Savage for a time. To be continued. Did you enjoy our video? Be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.